Okay, good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining the Acon LA 2021. My name is Ho Chen San, your host, and our co-host today is Nancy Melusi, and we will be moderating the chat and Q&A for during this session. Today we have our guests, Bish and Neil, and he will be talking about a step toward normalcy beyond COVID-19, utilize moratorium left. And Neil, he's the managing director of Accenture Strategy, and his specialty is customer strategy and transformation, creating compelling customer solution experience and culture that drive profitable growth and operational efficiency. And he also has a specialty of digital marketing and technology enablement for global brand in B2B and B2C environment, and have worked across the several industries such as utilities, wireless, and insurance and retail. And Vish is the senior manager in applied intelligence practice at Accenture. He has more than 12 years experience driving large-scale data and advanced analytic transformation. He has been data, AI, ML innovator in many organizations, creating a new product and services and optimizing business processes. His primary focus in last 5 years was finding new way to overcome the most complex challenges by harnessing the power of the data and artificial intelligence and machine learning with basic public service and utility sector. Without further ado, I will hand over this to speaker, and thanks for being here, Neil and Bish.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate the time. Looking forward to it. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So what we're talking about here today, I think as you just heard a second ago, you hear a lot about, you heard from even my own background. I'm from strategy, Vish is from our applied intelligence or digital practice. So you hear a lot about the intersection of strategy and data science here today. That's what we're really after. I'm translating insights into strategy. So the context of what we're talking about, the company that we're talking about is a North American regulated utility, very similar to on the West Coast, SDG&E, SoCal Edison, that type of a company. Not one of those two, but in North America, similar kind of business, regulated utility. So let's go ahead and I think we can move. That's the rough agenda, but let's go ahead and go to the context, just to get to the chase. So really, the background here. Pre-pandemic, these companies, utility companies, even a lot of their sister companies like wireless companies, they've always struggled with a population of customers that have historically had problems affording and paying their bills. So that's always been a problem. The pandemic really launched this into a new stratosphere. And so not only did it make the situation worse for those customers, it also added to the ranks. New customers that were historically kind of just making it by, started having difficulty paying their bills. So in around March, April of 2020, state regulators put in place moratoriums on disconnection for non-payments. In other words, utility companies would not be able to disconnect you if you did not pay your bill. So just keep on using as much energy as you want, and no problem. Don't pay, no problem. No problem for the customer. It sounds great. We'll talk about in a second what that created, the challenge that created for the company. So that helped a lot of customers keep the lights on, keep the AC on. That was very, very needed in a really difficult time. However, it was a temporary measure. Everybody kind of knew that this was eventually going to be lifted. And that's what we're faced with now. Late last year, and even into today, there's still some utilities that are because this is happening at a state level. Everyone's going at different pace. These moratoriums are starting to be lifted, and so the utilities really have to figure out what do I do here? How do I re-emerge? How do I get back and turn this back on? I know if I flip a switch and just turn it back on, bad things might happen. I might have to think about this situation a little bit differently. So that's where we are as of now. Literally, a lot of these utilities are now, this moratorium is gone, and the situation has changed. So now with customers, and now that's the customer story. Now, if you look at the utility story, the company story, what's going on behind the scenes, arrearages, AR, revenue, they're not collecting revenue for these customers. The accounts receivable has just been stacking up, getting older and longer and bigger to historic unprecedented levels. And that's where the utilities are faced with right now. And so yes, there's some help on the federal side, but as you can see on the slide, that the math doesn't add up. The benefit doesn't really solve the problem. Not to mention the last bullet point, that whatever payment programs they've historically offered to help people pay better, those have been met with very modest enrollment and participation. It's not really solving the need. Customers also haven't felt like the consequence of what if I don't pay? Doesn't really matter. Now it's starting to matter. So really, the backdrop is utilities are really figuring out, hey, I really need to not only offer them the right things, but I better engage them very proactively. I better have something that can help this situation. Otherwise, this is going to get pretty bad pretty quickly. Okay, let's keep going. So just to get a little bit more specific on what these companies, these utilities were really caring about, what they're watching from a KPI perspective, from their forecasting models were really, and this is this came from our own data as we work with our clients, to really say, from a credit and collections perspective, they were looking at huge increases in DSO, or day sales outstanding, which is all about the timeliness of payments. Uncollectible bad debt, big increases in bad debt collection. They're going to have to write off a large proportion of their revenues. On the customer interaction side, huge spikes in call volume. Imagine all these customers who can't afford to pay a bill. All of a sudden, I turn the lights on and I start collecting on them. That's going to be a disaster. You're going to have phones ringing off the hook, very high cost to serve implications, big problem there from a customer interaction perspective. And then from a CSAT perspective, probably no need to state the obvious here, it's a terrible customer experience. What can you do to prevent and mitigate that? So these were some of the KPIs that were of tremendous interest to most of our clients. Let's keep going. So all that said, goal statement, our primary client here was the senior vice president of customer operations, customer service. And really what her perspective was really hey Neil and Vish, right? How do I emerge and get back to some semblance of normal? It's not going to be exactly normal. It can't just come back to what it used to be. How should I really think about this? Typically, do I need to look at my customers differently? I typically have more of a one-size-fits-all type of approach. Do I need to be more targeted? Do I need to understand them at a deeper level? Should I think about channel strategy in a different way? Should I be offering new products and programs and services that address this need differently? How do I get back and help my customer be successful as we get back to business? Because ultimately, I do have a business to run, and yes, I'm trying to help people, but I do have a business to run, and this won't work indefinitely. Okay, so translating that client ask into our team's mission statement, if you will, what we're really trying to get after is, I think the middle part is probably the interesting one for this crowd. So with the what being, how do we get back and have a smooth transition to some semblance of normal? Vish and I really spent a lot of time saying, hey, how can we use data science to go and inform the strategy? So we had a lot of customer data available to us, and Vish will get into the details of that on all the stuff that builds a proper segmentation model. So how can we use data science to then inform policy changes, program definition, targeted treatments and outreach, communicate, even copy on the communication? How can we use that to go and tailor all these different aspects of a customer outreach? And what's it all worth? What are those kind of KPIs you see at the bottom? Okay, Vish, let me turn it to you. You can take it from here.
Yeah, thank you, Neil. And by the way, as we were stepping out of this very first 1 hour meeting, this SVP said, hey, Neil and Vish, by the way, come back in 4 weeks. And we looked at each other and said, give us 6 weeks. We need a couple of weeks to mobilize. So you'll see how accelerated this program was and how much of a time constraint we had. So within that time constraint, we had to go through, we have to establish a framework. And that's the thing with Accenture, between the strategy and applied intelligence group, we bring this framework together to really kind of serve the overall agenda. So starting with the customer, then treatment, then timing of those treatment and channels. With customers, historically speaking, we've been basically dealing with, different programs, but they are kind of blanketed programs across all the customers. Instead, what we want to do is we wanted to kind of look at this now that we are in this COVID situation. We wanted to look at the data from the segmentation perspective. And why? Because different customers are facing different challenge, and we want to separate those, right? Separate those customers from that were kind of chronically challenged before COVID versus customers who are now getting into this late payment and other challenges due to real COVID impact. And so we really wanted to kind of start with the segmentation-based approach. Then once we have the segmentation, then we kind of, basically look at different treatments, whether it's existing changes to the policies that they have or kind of new programs. But figuring out what those are from our customer service and strategy group, and then figuring out how they overlay on top of these segments and what can be offered to different segments in terms of different treatments. And when, obviously, that's very, very important. When do we do that? When do we reach out to them? What is the right way of approaching them, whether it's through calling or email or only digital or what have you. So moving forward, when we talk about the approach at, I said 6 weeks, we basically, had a couple of weeks to kind of mobilize, define scope and goal, create customer analytic record. I'll get into that. Identify customer segment, develop treatments, and then align and sequence the treatments. That's how far of an effort we had. And afterwards, we kind of left this whole group with a proper framework and strategy for operationalizing the entire model. Moving forward, so when it comes to customer segmentation, we talked a little bit about that, but what was the, why did we start customer segmentation? Why now? It's because we really wanted to understand these pandemic impacted customers in a way that we haven't done before, and really apply these strategies based on the customer's need and how can we help them while becoming successful in making those payments where, they have, some of them have accumulated several months to 12 months worth of bills. And they really need to kind of get back to paying for all of those accumulated bills. And how did we do that? So Accenture has this customer analytic record. It's more or less similar to customer to really basically it's done from our industry experience with different clients within utility as well as outside of utility. So on day one, we bring this analytic record, which is a data model, and with key data points of what a utility customer would need. In this case, particularly in the collection methodology. So we'll talk about that next. So when we talk about this customer analytic record, while this is industry, utility industry specific, within utility industries, we want to kind of funnel it down to what would the collection car model look like. So when we talk about collection car model, here are some of the bigger areas that we covered, from internal attributes that we could gather from customers' internal customer data, and external attributes, which are some of the unemployment, weather, geocode characteristics, so on and so forth. For our activity that we did, we didn't have much time to go and really merge these two internal and external attributes. So we focused strictly on the internal attribute. When we talk about internal attribute and we talk about this customer analytic record, we came with this industry standard 260 data elements that we can start working with on day one. We then sat down and narrowed down those elements from 264 to 117 to basically specific to our client's need around the collection and customer service area. After sitting down with clients' IT and data architect organization, we realized that only 68 data points are the ones that we can really focus on for this assessment. And again, because it's a fast pace, we had to really narrow it down very quickly. When we talk about these data points, once we brought it in, there's a lot of transformation required too, and we worked on that in the background. But mainly when we talk about customer segmentation, we did feature engineering, and we focused on these 10 attributes that we brought together to really bring these 4 distinct clusters to the life. And next we'll talk about what those 4 different clusters were and what are their definition. Okay. So after the segmentation exercise, we came up with these 4 clear segments, and based on those behaviors of the different segments and data of those different segments, we were able to create this spectrum, high potential to on the cusp customers, to cash flow challenge, and to chronically challenged. And what this means is, when we talk about high potential, these are the customers that were barely past due and really never let their status go beyond that. They paid very, soon becoming past due. They paid off their debt and never really got into trouble, to like a little bit worse than that, and then kind of chronically challenged, which is bad to kind of going to worse. And this is how the data was divided between these 351,000 customers. So you can kind of clearly see these segments and characteristics of each of these segments on a spectrum. When we then dive deeper, once we got those segments, we pointed out key data points across these segments that really like kind of were glaring to us, and to, it was very important for clients as well to kind of show. For example, when we talk about these 4 different clusters, you can see that cash flow challenge customers are really, really likely to kind of call on an average, 20 calls per year, versus and then chronically challenged are like calling almost 8 times a year, versus the high potential on the cost. So you can see a little bit of a strategy coming out from the treatment perspective, which ones are going to be more digitally adaptable versus which ones are more kind of traditional calling and other methodology. Same thing with arrear balance. You can see 90 days plus arrear balance, where chronically challenged folks were really prone to accumulating balance 90 days and further out. So some of the data points to kind of mention here in clear comparison between the segments. Then we dive into, like, for each of these segments, we created a canvas. This was mainly for these executives to really understand the characteristics of these individual segments. So they can, when later we feed them with the strategy discussion and treatment discussion, they could really understand why a particular treatment would work for a particular segment. For example, in here, this is the on the cusp segment. We've got the attributes of those segment, how many customers, what was their average income look like, what would their behavior score look like, which is, good, one of the better ones. And then, what are some of the characteristics? And here there are some attributes around, like arrear balance on an average is $272. If we were to just compare these 2 canvas really quickly, cash flow challenge versus on the cusp, you will see one of the things that highlights really quickly is like 3.7 number of calls on an average versus 20 calls on an average between cash flow challenge as well as the on the cost. So huge differences that we were seeing. We kind of pointed those out and really helped them understand how these segments differ and how these customers' behavior differ segment to segment. Okay, moving forward, treatment packages. So this is where I'm going to bring Neil back. Basically, these are the treatment packages that we've kind of narrowed down from a very wide spectrum of different treatment packages. So Neil, you want to kind of help us walk us through the rest of this?
Yeah, sure. And just to reiterate what Vish just said is an important point with these customers, the regulated customers, that you have to understand that their mission is to provide equal, fair, equitable service to all their customers. And so the notion of segmentation and tailored and personalization, some of these things are somewhat new for these kind of customers. And so they're learning, and even to the extent that some of it can't even be actioned because they really have to offer the same thing to everybody. And so So point being is there's a lot of education required on why segment, how would you actually turn this on, and what does it really entail? Then to this point, and now we start to get, so Vish told you a lot about the who, if you will, like who is the customer, more than just if they're all these customers. Like, let's break it up further. Now we start to get into what, like, okay, what should we do? What should we offer them? And so really, the four high-level categories, each one of these had several sub-level offers and programs within them. But generally speaking, we spend a lot of time to create and work with the business to figure out what should we be offering. Everything from pretty simplistic payment plans, which are all about spreading the payment over time. Of course, they've been doing that historically, but thinking about what should the duration be. Like we typically we spread it over 4 months. Okay, should it be 6 or 12 months? Should we get rid of late payment charges? Should we reduce deposit kind of requirements? Lots of change. That's why I call that credit policy, right? So changes to credit policy within the construct of a payment arrangement, for example. The bottom left one is fairly interesting in the sense that energy assistance, lots of federal, state, local programs where assistance is offered. And today or previously, it's been very blanket offered. Like the first person to apply, great, here you go. So really thinking about, can we be more targeted? We've got X amount of dollars to offer. Can I really get it to those who need it the most? Be much more targeted. So that's what this had a lot to do, be more targeted distribution of energy assistance. Similarly with efficiency programs, these companies have great programs with energy efficiency, making your home or your business more energy efficient. So you use less, you consume less energy, and consequently have a lower bill. Which you saw that on the segmentation one pager. We showed which ones the actual usage profiles of each of the load profiles of each of those different segments. So the client got a good understanding for which customers are using to what extent. Where can I offer efficiency? And this is great because this is not a Band-Aid solution. This gets to the root cause of energy optimization, right? So those kind of programs, similarly targeting those to the right people, the really ones that it's going to benefit the most. To the northeast quadrant here, pretty interesting in terms of, and this is kind of new thinking for the utility to say, hey, can I actually incentivize better behavior? So if you interact digitally, if you pay digitally, here's the extra, I'm going to give you some extra better terms, a few more days to pay, another month to spread your payment over. If you pay your balance, your old balance off in full, 10% discount, 50% discount, whatever it is. Thinking about how do you incentivize customers to take action? Because as I said before, they were kind of sitting on the fence and not doing a whole lot. And everything and then in the southeast quadrant, really getting into things like just making the experience better. As anybody who's worked in customer experience knows that if you just improve the experience, reduce effort, make it easier, you can improve customer success and have customers actually complete the outcome and be more successful. So that's what that one had to deal with. So if we go to the next slide, so that's a lot of, you heard the who, you heard a little bit about the what. Now it becomes a lot about how do you put those together? How do you say for this program, which customers, which segments does this align to? You see a little bit about the tactics on the bottom left quadrant about what's really in this package. What are we really talking about? What's the technology? What's going to be required to stand this up? Channels, in other words, what kind of channels should I be using it? Because we learned a lot about customer channel behavior in each segment. That if you build it, they will not come, right? Mm-hmm. So it's very important on what channel you select, which program you offer. All that stuff has to align, and that's what this is getting at. So this is helping our client connect the dots, if you will, from the insights to the programs to the channels, etc. Similarly, on the last slide, you'll see where if we go to the next slide, that one right there. So basically, this is there's a lot of detail and meat behind all this stuff, but generally speaking, we're really trying the trifecta of the segment, the program or the offer, and then the channels on how you actually engage, which channels I should be engaging the customer with, what kind of cadence, what's that journey and that experience look like. So that really brought it together for the customer to say, okay, here's the foundation of a plan. I understand for each of these different groups what I want to go to them with, how I want to engage them, and now it's getting close to roadmap time, if you will. Okay. I think that's most of the Vish. You had a couple points on what we were looking for. As Vish said, we had 6 weeks to work with. We were really strapped on time. This was a pretty pressing issue, board level topic, and so there were lots of things that we then went to the client with on how to embellish this going forward.
Right. So first, when we were first starting this exercise, the aspiration always for different clients, particularly me being from AI and ML organization, it's always like, well, why can't we create propensity to pay model or propensity to late pay model? And instead of segmentation, why can't we go even further, narrow it down to like a customer level? But again, if you think about a lot of these traditional organizations, they haven't really put in the framework to collect the historic data. So for example, what we brought in is this customer analytic record or customer 360 view. What you need on top of customer 360 view is, basically over the period of time, you need to build that customer 360 view with the snapshot, with historically kind of collecting the changes and snapshot over the period of time to create a proper time series. And that's when you operationalize the car model, you start creating the time series or historic snapshots. And once you have that, then you can start developing this predictive and causal analytics models to anticipate the behavior and value, right? Particularly around propensity to pay or propensity to late pay. Those could come later. So what we left with is, now that you have this framework around customer 360 and car, let's operationalize this and let's start collecting the data on weekly, daily basis and really build that over next 6 months to a year time frame so that you could be ready for step number 2 here, which is for predictive and analytic model in an upcoming year or so. It was really, really important for kind of, part of this exercise, that what we left client with, which is really, what can you do in the future? Another part is also with this customer analytic record, particularly because it touches so many different aspects of the business. And these matrix and everything is basically part of the data model, which is at the customer level. It allows the entire organization to learn and self-service from the same data model and same matrix and same calculation behind those matrix across the organization. So different part of the organizations are not having to then calculate their own, like, what's the average 12 months of bill? If you ask one organization or another, there's always differences. But if you were to create this customer 360 model and share it amongst all the organization, you'll see that now you have this harmony where everybody's looking at the same data set, but they were all calculated based on the same formula, so to speak. So now, we are enabling self-service without having your end users do a lot of those transformation or calculations or aggregation, which is always hard to do. So that's another one that we can enable. And then offer optimization through the channel and testing capability and value realization. What this means in a general is a lot of these treatments that we came up with. Well, because we are collecting the history and we are seeing these, incremental changes in the customer behavior, we now have a mean with customer analytic record to measure what is the customer behavior look like today versus yesterday. And that will give you an understanding of what kind of optimization you're getting in terms of, like, payments made, right? Just that's one of the simple one. Or in terms of a year balance that on an average or year balance that customers are carrying. So something that you can do or enable through this data model and self-service analytics. So really, these are the main 4 topics that comes to my mind when it comes to next steps. So with that said, I think we're pretty much on our 30-minute mark. And thank you very much for your patience, and we can get into the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Vish and Neil. And we're waiting for Q&As coming in. Yeah, I agree with Nancy. All right, then. Thank you, Neil and Vish, for the great presentation. And I hope we'll gain some insight from the session as well. And you can contact the speaker directly if you have any further question regarding this topic. And please provide your feedback using the form provided in the chat box. And thank you again, everyone, for joining today's presentation. And thank you so much be part of this year DataCon LA, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.